Vietnam, Vietnam, Rising Storm 2, Vietnam, Vietnam, the Vietnam War, Vietnam, Vietnam, Vietnam War setting, Vietnam War, Vietnam, Vietnam War multiplayer game. No, the most undisclosed setting is not Vietnam. Although I've used this word so many times in this video, so I probably should be awarded with its citizenship for making such a promotion of the country. You know, some things never change. They always stay the same. They are constant, persistent, sustained. Like this place in World War II shooters. You've been there a ton of times, doing the very same things over and over again, and it hasn't changed a bit. As well as war. War never changes. Those who follow the gaming industry definitely know where this quote comes from. Although the gaming series using it as a mode has to do nothing with the word directly, the quote perfectly conveys how the things are in reality. War has been one of the most popular cultural topics throughout the human existence. Since the early ages, legends, stories, songs and tales have been full of great men accomplishing feats. Great paintings feature beautiful noble knights in shiny armor. The later forms of art have also continued exploring this topic. There are many war books, war movies, and war games, of course. Interestingly enough, each of these fields of art have been actively taking ideas from one another, resulting in both magnificent and awful artworks. I'm a huge fan of shooters. Far Cry was the very first computer game that I've played. Don't really remember how old I was back then, maybe 3 or 4 years old. And since then I was drawn to shooters and computer games in general. But being a huge fan of firing virtual guns, I've always wondered why there are not so many games taking place in the setting of the Vietnam War. This period of history has always been interesting for me for some reason. At some point, I started watching the Vietnam War movies with my father, and this was definitely an inner turning point for me in life. Well, there were many other great films that had a tremendous influence on me and built on me as a personality. But a solid part of them were about the Vietnam War, so there appeared even more desire to play some games in the Vietnam War setting. For the most of these films, the setting of Vietnam was not only about the place, but it was rather about a certain idea these films are imbued with, and the vision of the war they have. Although being war movies, they are not about killing people all around. They are about something different, and from my opinion, the gaming industry seems to have some sort of problems with this topic. Fixing that, and filling this gap, would be an amazing step for the industry, and for the shooter genre in particular. Which, let's be honest, is not having its best time right now. Let me explain what I mean, but first I need to start from a bit different angle. From movies. You know, usually there are 2 distinct types of military movies out there. Of course, this is a very rough division, but I think it would be viable in this case. The first one is a classic, well-known Rambo-style genre of films. I think you all know what I mean by that. Most people there are portrayed like characters from a legend. In most cases they are defined as being strictly good or bad, having a quite primitive background behind them. And there's usually not that much logic in their actions, so thinking too much about what they are doing can actually spoil the watching experience. Other parts of such a movie usually follow this similar legend-like pattern. The events also usually don't make much sense there, contradicting with all known laws of physics and common sense. Characters can fall from a height, get a few bullets, or survive a nearby explosion, but then still rise and run to victory. Yes, usually the plot of such films is a simple run and gunning to a predefined victory line like killing all the bad guys or saving the day. And you have no doubts this is going to happen, because this is what happens in all good stories and legends. Happy end. And this is okay. Seriously, I have nothing against such movies. Of course, I have described some abstract Frankenstein film combining all these stupid features. However, it's all a question of balance, isn't it? There are many combat action movies that are really cool to watch, despite being a pure attraction, unless some part starts dominating too much or the level of stupidity goes beyond the acceptable one. Did you enjoy the last Top Gun movie? Lone Survivor, Fury? Some of them are more serious and realistic, soundless. But all of them are quite nice films without pretentious attempts to leave their genre category. They have an interesting capturing plot, touching music, good special effects, a piece of drama, and all of the remaining parts being more or less balanced with each other, producing an okay one-time film. Military actions usually play an auxiliary, or if you want, a supplementary role here, helping other parts of the movie to succeed. These can be stories of love, betrayal, saving the world, cool guys solving big problems, bringing democracy to the places that never asked for it, another, but never about the war as such. They don't really emphasize on the fact of the war itself, what it really is, what it does to people, what the consequences are, etc. Everything is quite simple and superficial here. Thus, you would rarely want to rewatch such a film because there's actually not that much to think about. It's just a chewing gum that stays in your mouth for some time but never gets swallowed. These films never win Best Film awards, but they are not even trying to do that. They serve as a good attraction for people, and again, I'm absolutely fine with it. Even though I'm not a huge fan of this type of films, I can watch them from time to time to relax, enjoy cool moments and special effects, embrace the nonsense and cringe of some actions, and sometimes laughingly discuss them with my friends afterwards. There are a lot of good examples of such movies, and they definitely deserve a place in our world. You know, I've thought for a while what I should call the type of movies I want to talk about. You may see them called anti-war in most cases, but I don't really like this term as usually this isn't the only idea behind them. That's why I would use a term that also doesn't fully reflect the essence of these films, but I just like it more. Realistic film. Apocalypse Now, Full Metal Jacket, Letters from Iwo Jima, Platoon, All Quiet on the Western Front, Jarhead, The Deer Hunter, The Hard Lurker, and other masterpieces of serious war cinematography. I was captured by these movies as they had showed me something I had never seen before, and I was amazed. These films are not about valiant heroes nobly going through a war, but rather about depicting the war in its true shape. No one is rushing an enemy with a gun here. People are dying all over the place. Blood, filth, explosions, chaos and madness are everywhere, and there is a single desire here. Get back home in one piece. A well-made movie can show how horrible and terrifying this is. I still remember the emotions watching the rider Valkyrie from Apocalypse Now for the first time. This was an amazing scene from the cinematic standpoint, frightening and giving goosebumps at the same time, as it's full of realistic violence, killing and destroying everything around. And the worst thing to realize is that similar and worse happens in real life. These films are not afraid of showing the most horrible manifestations of war. Lost limbs, destroyed homes, killed children, mangled but still alive bodies, colossal level of violence, horrible war methods people use against one another, and the terrifying psychological transformation a human mind is going through.
Get down!
Usually, there's a quite huge focus on the psychological part, with characters suffering serious mental traumas after all they had witnessed, as such severe environment are the ideal conditions to dig inside the human mind, to expose its essence and explore its darkest corners. What a human mind would do for surviving, and are you ready to kill for it? How far can I go with my obsession? Am I actually a human after all that? These are all hard questions about yourself with sometimes unbearable answers. The Hard Locker and Apocalypse Now bring an astounding topic that some people with PTSD can suffer from. At war, you won't get home. But once you're at home, you won't get to war. Just imagine how twisted a mind can be. Some say the closest people they have ever met are those they met at war, and a lot of people find meaning at war, as everything is very simple there. You're just trying to survive. At normal life, you can't be doing that. And war is a true drug for some. I've mentioned a few films, and one may notice that most of them are films about the Vietnam War. This is not because I like them more, but because the dominant number of such movies are about the Vietnam War. Although there are other, obviously, and there is no surprise here, with the Vietnam War being one of the most controversial periods of the America's history, causing tremendous social changes. It is an ideal military conflict to discuss these topics. In such a movie, you would often see a shot of a man staring into the void and embracing the insanity of everything around, realizing how violent, unhumanistic, and purposeless their actions are, realizing the inner human barbaric cruelty and animal fear, realizing that their true enemies are not the ones sitting in the jungles, but the ones who used populistic slogans and crowd ovation to send them into the middle of these hot, human jungles to die and kill the very same people. And paradoxically enough, even realizing that, this is almost impossible to be not like that there. These films are pretty hard to watch. Not because they are boring or dull, but because they show war in the realistic, terrifying manner and raise quite serious psychological and philosophical topics, leaving a lot for a viewer to digest. You know, I can talk a lot about these films. This genre is very important to me, as played a huge role in forming me as a personality. I would finish this part with the Apocalypse Now director's quote.
My film is not a movie.
Mon film n'est pas un film, c'est pas du cinéma.
My film is not about Vietnam.
C'est pas au sujet du Vietnam,
It is Vietnam.
c'est le Vietnam.
It's what it was really like. It was crazy.
C'était comment était Vietnam réellement, vraiment, c'était fou.
And the way we made it was very much like the way the Americans were in Vietnam. We were in the jungle.
On était au jungle,
There were too many of us.
et on était de trop dans l'équipe.
We had access to too much money,
On avait accès à trop d'argent,
too much equipment,
trop d'équipement,
and little by little we went insane.
et peu à peu, on est devenu fou.
But what about games? This is the main topic here. They've been borrowing ideas from movies all the time. But do you know any recent AAA titles being primarily focused on the Vietnam War? In the 2000s, there was a popularity boom of shooters set during the Vietnam War. It produced games like Viet Cong, Man of Valor, Conflict Vietnam, and other. But let's face it, none of these games were really successful or has become classic, unless you have a nostalgic feeling as you were playing them as a kid. Of course, the Vietnam War setting is present in giant series like Call of Duty or Battlefield, but usually it wasn't a serious headliner. There is a Battlefield Vietnam game and a Battlefield Bad Company Vietnam add-on that received quite positive feedback and created communities around them. But again, this was quite long ago and it didn't go any further. These are secondary products of the huge Battlefield series, and they were made as secondary products without a huge beat on them. Bad Company in Vietnam is not even a full game, but just a multiplayer DLC. And yeah, these projects did not feature a single-player campaign, which I consider a very important part of a shooter. The Call of Duty franchise doesn't even have a single game fully dedicated to Vietnam. But this setting is successfully used in the single-player campaign. Yeah, Vietnam appears in the Call of Duty games, but it does so as someone's flashback in the Black Ops series. And from my personal opinion, these missions are usually the most interesting levels in the games, featuring cool atmosphere and action. However, still, this is rather a minor part of the games, serving more as a utility to elaborate on details of current events. There are only 5 levels featuring Vietnam in Black Ops 1, among total 15, and only 2 in Cold War, making it a very secondary topic here.
I hear the enemy.
Of course, speaking about the Vietnam War games, I cannot help mentioning Rising Storm 2 Vietnam, which, in my opinion, has probably been the most successful the Vietnam War multiplayer game yet. Although being not the most perfect game in the technical aspect, it definitely does a great job at putting a player in the middle of the combat actions of the Vietnam War. Even though the game may look like some cheap Battlefield copy at the first glance, it immediately makes you feel serious once you engage in a combat. The game is much closer to more of a tactical shooter with the emphasis on correct team maneuvering and thoughtful tactics than to shooting 20 people in 5 seconds and calling an UAV. At the same time, it doesn't go too much in being realistic like Hell Let Loose or Squad. Don't get me wrong, these are wonderful games, giving some different experience and pleasure from a shooter. But I'm just not a fan of running for 5 minutes and then instantly dying out of nowhere. Of course, such situations also happen in Rising Storm, but still, the game is much open to a mass player than the mentioned two. Generally speaking, the main attracting feature of the game is the atmosphere. Usually, you don't clearly see enemies, but just shoot in their direction as they hide behind bushes and trees. Dying here is very painful as it happens in the fast and unexpected manner with a distinctive headshot sound. It takes 1, maximum 2 bullets to kill an enemy, or to get killed. That's why you would rarely see someone rushing a position. Most players usually try to play rather tactically, hiding and waiting for enemies to come. Despite having not the most contemporary graphics, the environment is very authentic here, with all the locations and sounds being so immersive that it immediately absorbs you. Rice fields, endless jungles, Vietnamese villages, shooting sounds, soldier screams, explosions. It all looks, feels and sounds like such a game should. And players do actively support this atmosphere, turning on that time music while flying a helicopter or showing their acting talents.
Where?
I smell him!
We're
I
surrounded.
smell him!
Where?
Let's go!
Where?
Holy shit!
Ah!
Oh, I'm hit! Run, Mom, go!
Oh God!
Run! Hello, kid!
Somebody go ahead!
They keep shooting me! Ah! I can't run! No! No! Keep your head down, son!
And the key word here is authentic. That's, from my opinion, one of the biggest problems of modern shooters. You can make astounding special effects or super realistic simulation of a combat zone, but once you lack on authenticity, you fail. Your game starts looking like a theater or a kids show with plastic soldiers and tanks, and not the most immersive one. Rising Storm is definitely not the most realistic war game out there, but fortunately it doesn't go into this and that, which I don't want to discuss in this part. It just perfectly balances between having enough hardcore elements to add on the authenticity and seriousness, but not too much to prevent the player from just entering a server and killing a few enemies here and there in a fun, intuitive, and not tedious manner. If I were to pick the best game in the Vietnam War setting today, I would probably pick Rising Storm 2. But at the same time, there is actually not that much to pick from. It may seem from my speech that I'm just complaining about the lack of the Vietnam War games and consider it as the most undisclosed setting, which is not actually true. Yeah, being one of the most interesting military conflicts for me, I'd like to see more titles portraying this period. But I'd like to focus on a different thing. The reason why I'm making so much emphasis on the Vietnam War is because it has probably been the most authentically portrayed conflict in the American culture. I don't know any other war that has been present in the American cinematography with such a solid focus on the anti-war topics. The cultural field related to the Vietnam War is all about the war horrors and human mistakes. In the beginning, I pretty boldly divided war movies in two rough categories: Rambo-style movies and the realistic ones. Whether game developers want it or not, they continue looking at movies as one of the sources of inspiration for their games. And I find it quite surprising to see the war shooter genre not to have a similar division inside itself. This statement may sound a bit controversial from one perspective because there's an evident difference between, say, Rainbow Six Siege, Call of Duty and Arma. But if you look at them from a different angle, they are very similar in a way they show a war or a conflict. They are all run-and gun games that main focus is shooting and killing enemies, which is not bad. The name of the genre is shooter, so it makes sense that the main activity here is to shoot. Rarely do they pay attention to the conflict itself. It's rather a decoration here for providing more exciting ways of killing others and creating entertaining combat scenarios. Characters, their motivation, certain events are all secondary here. The main objective is to unleash the inner savage in you, to turn it into a killing machine, destroying everything on its way without asking too many questions. This concept is very similar to the Rambo movie genre I described, as it doesn't try to make you think much, but mostly relies on players' inner instincts. These games do not explore complex topics over war itself. Everything is very simple. There are good things to do, and there are bad guys to kill to accomplish the good things. Sounds very propagandistic-like, doesn't it? While some games may promote themselves as ones featuring the famous grey morale, usually this is a marketing ploy in most cases, and in reality they are primitivist usually. However, not without surprises. I know only a single game standing out from the crowd having a different perspective on war actions. Spec Ops: The Line. Being a pretty mediocre game as a shooter, as in fact this is a very stupid run-and-gun game in terms of gameplay, it features an amazing story and a wonderful setting. The game starts as a classic military shooter with a pretty well-defined task to find out what's going on in the abandoned Dubai after a failed evacuation. But just after a few hours, it turns into a terrifying journey, not to the hearts of the city, but inside the main character's head. There is a pretty serious plot, bringing up such topics as what a war is, how it changes people, what they do to one another. The game is full of senseless and ruthless brutality, showing that there is no winner at a war, and a few reckless actions may have horrible consequences with no turning back, even if your intentions were absolutely pure. Throughout the game, the characters witness such a huge number of war horrors that they obviously suffer both physical and psychological transformations, which you don't usually see in most games, especially considering that some horrors are caused by none other than you. You can literally see characters getting more serious injuries and losing their mind. And the further you go, the more brutality you witness, the more atrocities you commit, the more you ask yourself if this is the right thing to do, and if you are the main hero in fact, and not the main villain. Even the name of the game suggests to think about the line you can cross and never be the same.
Why?
You brought this on yourself.
We were helping.
What? Oh no.
You see soldiers similar to yourself who were abandoned during the evacuation. You meet civilians fighting for survival due to the water shortage, and you realize they are all humans with their own truth as you are, trying to stay alive in this hell. One of the strongest scenes of the game is when it makes you to shoot civilians because they had hanged your teammate. And the most horrifying fact is that you can't shoot in the air. There is no need to kill them. But this thought doesn't come to your mind, even for a second, and you can't understand this.
Let me take him, Walker. Sir, permission to open fire. I need you to give the word.
Damn it.
Walker, give me the fucking word.
Take him down.
The game has evidently been inspired by Apocalypse Now and probably by the original book, Heart of Darkness, as there are clear similarities in the plot and race topics, discussing the darkest corners of the human mind. It's not a war tale with you being the savior of the world, but a story of obsession and attempts to understand it. Taking place in Dubai and having this apocalyptic style, Spec Ops sometimes presents very strong views. The luxurious city covered with sand is magnificent. Huge buildings, glass rooms, expensive cars, but everything destroyed and abandoned. The power of contrast and juxtapositions is immense and works perfectly here. The game is beautiful and horrifying at the same time, because you don't really know how to feel because of this oppressive atmosphere. There's definitely a message from the developers behind all of that, and everyone finds their own meaning in it.
You okay?
Do I look okay to you?
What happened to Lugo isn't our fault.
Don't tell me what I already know. Lugo's blood is on your hands, not mine. Bang.
And a big part of the atmosphere is the soundtrack, which mostly consists of long guitar plays, creating a very suitable depressive and melancholic mood. I'm not going to spoil the ending, but the finale, as it usually happens in such stories, is simple and absurd as it should be. But with you who killed a huge number of people for God only know what reason, and completely lost your mind. And this is the most undisclosed setting in shooters and in games probably. The setting of a war being not an attraction, but a horrible place destroying destinies. That is the game we need, with an idea of not focusing on killing more and more enemies, but on showing what a death is and what it makes to people killing others. I can't imagine such a game being about not killing anyone at all. Why not? Let's say killing enemies would be bad for characters. Focus on the other parts like stealth or helping others being a medic. Show what a character would feel killing a person for the first time. Show what happens to the mental part of the human in the combat actions. Create the characters that are not just dummy puppets for saying scripted phrases explaining where to go, but that are here to be worried about and showing what a war does to a human. Technology is allowed to do that. Show another side not just as bad guys to kill, but as people like you are with their own life and truth behind it. Develop a deep, well-thought story that would make players think and discuss it afterwards. Put player in controversial situations with no right and easy choice to make. There are tons of ideas to implement, and there's been a huge amount of material in history, films and books to take an inspiration from. I have literally no idea why no one has ever developed anything like that. That would be an amazing game to see, especially considering the modern technologies. And the reason why I'm being mentioned Vietnam for the entire video is because I think the Vietnam War is the best setting for such a game. Not only this is one of the least portrayed modern conflicts in games, but it's also a period full of controversy that would only play into the hands of such a game. There is so much to show horrors and lack of sense at war in this setting. Of course, it would require a single-player campaign, which developers pay less and less attention to, focusing on the multiplayer part. Back in the past, the single-player part of a shooter was as important as the multiplayer one, and this way games have been sticking in memory. I know, the paradigm of selling games has changed. In the past, developers received a single sum of money for each single sold copy of a game, so having a solid campaign was essential. But now it's different. Players pay for a copy of a game, for boosters, for a season pass, skins, characters, guns, etc. It used to make sense in the past to focus on single-player campaign as it attracted people. But now, why would you do that if you can focus on microtransactions for multiplayer and earn much, much more? But what about the artistic value and creating something that would live even after all the hype is gone? What about making a game that is discussed and given credit even a few years after release? Or let's just add more cat skins to Call of Duty and that's it.